Hi, everyone. I just want to offer a little bit more context around our readings for the week, and I want to just sort of help set that mindset and make sure that we're staying anchored with when we read some of these concepts that we're staying anchored in how does it relate to our role as building and district and educational leaders. So sometimes it requires a little bit more imagination with some of these chapters and concepts than others. Fortunately, the concepts in these chapters are tend to be a little bit more apples to apples. When we look at chapter 14, we're looking at managing facilities, and that typically what you're going to see there is building projects and looking at, in particular, where do school business professionals fit into that role. But again, be thinking about your role as well. It is interesting to see where a school business professional does fit into that because there's some decision-making capacity that they have, and then there's some decision-making capacity that very arguably should not rest with one person, especially when we're talking about public service and public institutions. So some interesting points to consider there. When you talk about facilities maintenance planning or long-term facilities maintenance is a lot of times what you'll hear it referred to as, and that may even sneak its way into a strategic plan as well, certainly board goals, school board goals. But what you're going to want to be thinking about there is an example I commonly use is the roof of a building. Any medium or moderate to certainly large size school, a roof is easily going to cost $1 million. And in a climate where you have four seasons, it's a very high wear item that money is not just going to be laying around in a general fund. It's not budgeted for on a yearly basis, and you're not going to tap your fund balance, your fund reserve to pay for a roof. All of those things are irresponsible to rely upon. So what are you going to do? You need a long-term facilities maintenance plan, and you need to keep up with that. And that's something that is within the control of somebody like a business manager or a superintendent to be responsible for mapping those things out. School buildings seem to age twice as rapidly as houses or anything else, and it could be because we uh, pack a ton of kids into them. That could be why, but it happens and we need to be ready for it. And every single year there are things that break, and every single year there are improvements that need to be made, or sometimes safety plans dictate that we need to change what windows are made of, or what where we can have doors and which ways the doors swing, and all of those things are involved in managing facilities. Managing materials. So this is going to look at things like purchasing orders and how do schools get the materials that they need, and the districts get materials they need. What's the approval process? Um, this is really interesting, and this is something that just reflecting upon my own experience going from somebody who was in school counseling, and so like a teacher ranks versus a leadership position is looking at want versus need. And whereas at first it might have been a little bit more indiscernible, it became something where it was, all right, I'm going to look at this twice, or I'm going to follow up with the person, or I need a little bit more information about this, or um, the hazard there. In practice, that is responsible, but the hazard there is that we can end up making decisions um, by being indecisive. So if we wait too long, sometimes purchasing windows close. Sometimes we lose some social capital with the individuals who is relying on something and is looking for you to be their champion to get that push through. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind there when we're talking about managing materials. The chapter sort of looks from a district standpoint, and certainly, the business professional, but think about at the building level, how are those decisions and our relationship even with the school business administrator, do they understand what we need? Do they understand what that teacher needs? And certainly, at least in most all cases that I can think of personally, a teacher isn't going to call a business manager directly asking for clarification or asking for funding. They're relying upon us as building leaders to be their advocates. And so that's again something we need to understand the process that a business manager goes through so that we can approach that tactfully, that conversation with them. or if we feel like, yeah, we might have to argue about it a little bit or argue for it a little bit, we know how to go into that conversation. Those are important things. And then finally, managing risks. The chapter talks a lot about insurance. That's a really, really hot button issue with a lot of schools right now. It can be a huge cost. In a district I was associated with and worked for, we the healthcare was really at the crux of a lot of financial strife or frustration within the district, and in part, uh, we needed to make some changes because of the cost of the insurance, or partly because of that, and that is very, very sensitive. Just like taxation to fund public schools, where is my money going as a public taxpayer? When you're an employee, or when you're used to getting that good health care, and people start talking about it and how expensive it is, it can be very, very threatening, and it can be very scary. So those are things to really keep in mind, and how it can affect morale in a building, even when it's being talked about as how expensive it is. That can affect morale very, very quickly and very at a very deep level, even if it's not being discussed about pulling back on health insurance or changing it, or it needs to change, or even just an acknowledgement can set things off. So that it illustrates that we need to be very careful, and also practice discretion on certain items that are even just being discussed. But identifying that there are some certain things with risk management that really affect people at a deep level, and be thinking about that, and be thinking about what is our role as building leaders and district leaders, and how we communicate that with our employees, with our colleagues, and first of all, how do we stay out of situations where we need to have difficult conversations around those things, so long as they're avoidable issues and decisions. So be thinking about those contextual items there as you go through the readings for this week. I look forward to the responses and the discussions as always, and I will speak with you next week.